The next session will be presented by Caroline Doehring, and it's on the efficacy of homeopathy in livestock, concluded from peer-reviewed publications from 1980 to 2014. Caroline.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for the nice introduction, and hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to go deeper with you into the topic of homeopathy. We already heard a bit of it. And what I'm going to present is a short excerpt of my review that is much more intended on the efficacy of homeopathy in livestock based on peer-reviewed publications. This research was also performed within those big European research projects called IMPRO, the same as in the presentation before. So the current situation is that homeopathy is a widely used treatment on farms in European countries, not only organic farms. For example, in Germany, 30% of all farms use homeopathy for their animals, and in organic farms, it's even higher, up to 70 and 80%. And homeopathy is also highly or hot discussed as an alternative or a way to reduce antimicrobials. This reduction is necessary, as we heard in the session in the morning, as we have a rise of multi-resistant strains of bacteria in humans and animals worldwide. And especially it is also necessary as livestock is blamed to be one of the main causes of those developments. For consumer safety, we want no multi-resistant bacteria or residues of antimicrobials in our food or in our environment. But first of all, a certain treatment or a remedy for human or animal, doesn't matter, has to be effective for the health and the welfare. Those efficacy of homeopathy, as we already heard, is controversially discussed in the research world, but also among the practitioners dealing with those animals. And and the purpose of our research was therefore to assess if homeopathy is effective and thus a possible way to reduce the use of antimicrobials on the farms without risking animal health and also without risking consumer safety. Turning to the materials and methods. To assess those questions, we considered peer-reviewed publications of scientific journals and author doctoral thesis in English or German, covering a time frame between 1980 and 2014. Those trials had to be performed under European or comparable condition in regard to intensive farming management and to housing. The main focus was here on studies using homeopathy to treat or prevent common production diseases that are usually treated with antimicrobials or to support growth promotion. Some of you from Europe would say, oh, we have banned those antibiotic growth promoters in livestock since 2006, but they are still used in America and other non-European countries, and maybe they are also still used disguised in Europe as a metaphylactic treatment. All studies that we found were further analyzed with a predefined protocol based on the PRISMA guidelines for more detailed information on the publication background, the animals, the diseases, the study design and the actual implementation, and of course the outcome for efficacy. Turning now to the first results, we ended up, it seems to be nearly the same. We ended up with 62 publications meeting our criteria, and as some studies were published as doctoral thesis and as well as a paper, the material in the end contained 60 trials, 60 individual clinical trials. The majority of those trials were published in scientific journals and dealt with cattle. The purpose to apply homeopathy was for prevention in 28 trials, and of those those were included 5 aiming for general good health or for growth promotion. or to cure a disease in 24 trials, or a metaphylactic treatment in 8 trials. So let's take a look at the indications from the trials on different species. The column on the left you can see, and not this one, it's fast. This on the left one on cattle, you can see the main indication to use homeopathy was mastitis or fertility disorders in dairy cows, and to a smaller proportion for respiratory diseases and diarrhea in calves. In the middle you can see the column for pigs. Look also at that it was a few, not so many trials as for cattle, so we find the main proportion was for cattle. Just when to look at the percentage, you have to look at also at the number of studies. So for pigs, it was really well balanced between fertility disorders in sows, and for diarrhea and respiratory diseases in piglets, and as well as aiming for general good health and growth promotion in fattening pigs. And the column on the right you can see is on poultry. I have to say we only found studies dealing with chicken, and here the main indication was growth promotion, general good health, and diarrhea in this. Nearly all of those animals became sick by natural infection. In the trials, we had only 3 trials on chicken that induced an infection artificially. Coming to the diagnostic procedures that we learned is really important from the presentations before, and the diagnostic procedure in those trials applied was mainly the record of clinical signs compared to measurements, what was something that were not directly connected to the disease, like body weight or like milk performance, something like this, or direct tests. It was a detection of the pathogen in milk or blood or in the feces, or indirect test like a California mastitis test. And those and other measures to evaluate the amelioration or deterioration were mainly taken by a veterinarian or by a scientist. But there was also studies, there were only, the measures were only taken by the farmers. And somewhat surprising was the fact that only 6 of all studies involved an expert in veterinary medicine or mentioned that they had one. Coming to the overview, all in all, when trying to answer the question of efficacy, 30 trials found homeopathy to be effective. And this means that results for a group treated with a homeopathic remedy were significantly better than for a placebo or an untreated group, or just as effective as a conventional treatment, what was mainly an antibiotic treatment. 24 trials found no medicinal effect, and 6 trials ended with inconclusive results. Looking at the single species, only studies dealing with pigs were more often in favor of homeopathy. Looking at the study design, because the study design has a decisive influence on the scientific quality and of course then also on the results of the trial, we also had a deeper look in this. In single clinical trials, double-blinded randomized control trials with the closed eyes are regarded as a gold standard to provide those empiric evidence we are always asking for in the evidence-based veterinary medicine, to provide those evidence of the efficacy of a certain remedy, not depending on which. And unfortunately, a lot of studies did not have a blinding or had other shortcomings, increasing the risk of bias. For example, they considered very few animals, or what was really often is that they are funded by the manufacturer of the homeopathics or the antibiotics. Overall, we found double-blind randomized control trials more likely failing to verify efficacy, while all other tended to show efficacy of the homeopathic remedy applied. Coming to different dilutions, some of you may be aware that you can apply them not so much diluted, so you can still detect some of the starting ingredients, and some use more diluted forms. And we also looked at this. And this revealed that studies using low homeopathic dilutions were more likely to have an effect than high dilutions. The assessment of the ingredients of the homeopathic remedies showed no difference between single ingredient remedies, that were remedies with only one homeopathic ingredient in the starting substance, and complex remedies with several different homeopathic ingredients in the starting substance. And the way of administration also seemed to have no influence on the results. Coming to cure rates, at least for the therapeutic treatment, only 12 trials gave cure rates for the treatment groups. If you're wondering, cure rates, they should be, when you make a therapeutic treatment, there should have been a cure rate defined. But there are also some studies that evaluated with criteria like the number of retreatments or mortality rate or the duration of a disease. So we have only 12 trials of the 24 with the cure rate, and those cure was also defined in various ways, e.g. sometimes by clinical symptoms disappearing, and sometimes by the absence of the pathogen, and also other definitions. And this made the comparison even more difficult for us. Homeopathy, as you can see, ranged between 5 and 83% cure success, and antibiotics had a very similar range, and even groups treated with a placebo had a cure rate between 4 and 80%. In the single trials, results were sometimes in favor of homeopathy compared to antibiotic or others, and sometimes in favor of antibiotics. And in one trial, the placebo actually had the best cure rate. Following those results, the nature of the remedy in those trials did not seem to make a big difference. And what was probably the most important result of our evaluation was that amongst all studies we considered, not one study was repeated in a comparable manner. This means no trial ever either dealt with the same species indication, used the same remedy or at least the same homeopathic treatment procedure for the choice of the remedy, or had similar study conditions. Coming to the conclusion, comparing the cure rates in the just lost the track. Finally, we saw from our studies that homeopathy might be effective and might have a general potential to reduce or replace antibiotics. But as none of those trials were ever repeated, we are unable to conclude whether the results of the studies could be reproduced in a comparable trial. As a vet practitioner standing in front of a diseased animal, our first priority should be to apply the most effective treatment or remedy to prevent unnecessary suffering of the animal. But due to the currently unsatisfying study situation, we found we're not able to recommend homeopathy as a solution for the reduction of antibiotics. Representative studies proving efficacy that we found must be reproduced, ideally as double-blind randomized controlled trials under modified conditions. And then we find those evidence for efficacy, those should be subsequently confirmed on farm level by monitoring of all treatments and the outcomes. As you know, it doesn't mean the same when you make a clinical trial with optimum conditions and you receive a good result for a remedy, then it is also effective on a farm. That is sometimes completely different. Well, that's all from my side. Thank you for the attention, and you can find full-length reports of those research on the page of impro-dairy.eu. So thank you for your time and your attention.
If any of you have questions, you can raise it with Caroline afterwards, but we must go on. Thank you very much, Caroline.